Hello and welcome to World News on the Hour here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has ordered an immediate stop to the majority of the country's foreign aid, including aid for Ukraine, for 90 days pending review. The directive follows Trump's executive order signed on Monday, which paused new foreign relief obligations for a similar period of time. While Trump's executive order left some ambiguity about whether pre-approved aid for Ukraine would be affected, Rubio's directive halts both previously approved and new foreign aid obligations. The directive states that decisions regarding the continuation, modification or termination of the existing obligations will be made following Rubio's review. Ukraine has received more than $175 billion in U.S. foreign aid since the start of the war, making the U.S. the biggest contributor among the allies. Ukraine skeptic, former Fox News host Pete Hegseth has been confirmed as the U.S. Secretary of Defense. In a tie-breaking vote, Vice President J.D. Vance's vote tipped the scale in Hegseth's favor after 3 Republican senators voted against him. Former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was among the ones who opposed Hegseth's nomination. Hegseth, one of Trump's more controversial cabinet picks, faced multiple questions about alleged sexual assault, as well as infidelity and excessive drinking. Apart from multiple misconduct allegations, Hegseth was also criticized for his lack of government experience. He is now set to oversee a department of some 3 million employees and an $849 billion budget. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Friday that Vladimir Putin has been trying to influence Donald Trump's efforts to broker a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia and end the nearly 3-year-long war.
I received the report from the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service on Russia's military potential and Putin's readiness to continue the war and manipulate world leaders. Specifically, he is trying to manipulate the US president's desire to achieve peace. I am confident that no Russian manipulations will succeed any longer.
We can't speak of a democratic election with this level of repression prevailing, say members of the Belarusian opposition in exile, as Alexander Lukashenko is set to be re-elected as President of Belarus tomorrow. Experts believe the vote will be nothing more than a sham election. While Lukashenko has maintained some independence from Russia throughout the years, Moscow is tightening its grip on the country.
An election with the outcome perfectly obvious before the polls even open.
It will all go. I don't know the exact percentage, but everyone knows the result. Everyone has a clue. That's it.
This was the case in 2020 when Alexander Lukashenko rigged the presidential ballot.
2 of the strongest rivals of Lukashenko in the previous election, Sergei Tikhanovsky and Viktor Babarika, they're still in prison.
Belarus is heading for a rerun this weekend. On Sunday, Lukashenko will likely be voted president in a sham election for a 7th term.
We can't talk even about any democratic elections in the situation of such repression.
Lukashenko has ruled the country with an iron fist since 1994. He has been repeatedly labeled Europe's last dictator. However, he seems to have recently signaled a thaw, pardoning hundreds of political prisoners since last summer. Another 15 were released on Friday.
It's not change of policy. It's like testing democracy. Look, I released 20 people. Is it enough for you? Are you ready, to lift sanctions? Are you ready, to recognize me? No? Okay, 20 more.
In spite of the pardons, there are at least 1,200 unlawfully detained political prisoners in Belarus, according to human rights watchdog Vyasna. Around half of them are participants in the protests that followed the 2020 presidential election.
The rest are those who were targeted later for actions that happened later. That includes online commenting, so-called insulting and libeling Lukashenko, which is one of the most popular charges that the political prisoners face.
Polish journalist Andrzej Poczobut is among the detained. A member of the Polish minority in Belarus, he was charged on forged evidence and sentenced to 8 years in a penal colony for inciting hatred and carrying out terrorist activities.
He is a journalist who is already a symbol of freedom of speech, of solidarity. Unfortunately, for now, we have no information about his fate.
As the West broke friendly relations with Belarus following the brutal crackdown on the protests 4 years ago, Lukashenko has further fallen into the arms of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin has used Belarus as a launchpad for the invasion of Ukraine. Lukashenko has further deepened his country's economic dependency on Russia and uses Belarus as a warehouse for Russian nuclear weapons. With Putin's grip over Belarus tightening, questions mount whether the Eastern European country could become a consolation prize for the Russian leader if a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia leaves Kyiv independent from Moscow.
Lukashenko wants to be neither in Russia nor in Europe. He wants to maintain the balance that he has upheld for 30 years. But if Belarus remains this balcony that is controlled by Russia or is part of Russia's sphere of influence, it will become a major problem for the entire NATO bloc in the future.
In retaliation for the support Poland, Lithuania and other countries have provided to the exiled Belarusian opposition, Lukashenko sent thousands of migrants to destabilize neighboring states. The crisis continues to this day.
Marina Statkevich, wife of a well-known Belarusian dissident, currently serving a 14-year sentence, opened up about the conditions of her husband's imprisonment. Marina Statkevich was arrested during the mass protests against President Alexander Lukashenko in 2020.
Since February 9, 2023, I have no news from him. Since 2022, 2.5 years, almost 3 years that he has not received anything from outside. Not a toothpaste, not a toothbrush, no pants, no socks. The peculiarity of this prison is that nobody sees him inside the prison either. He's in a cell, he wrote to me while I was corresponding with him. He's in the basement. The prison is the old monastery with old white walls. The vaulted space. He is in the basement, in the cell 1 meter to 3. 1 meter to 3, so he can't open his arms.
Around 60,000 Slovakians took to the central square of the country's capital, Bratislava, in protest of Prime Minister Robert Fico's pro-Russian policies. The number of those attending is compared to the levels seen in the 2018 demonstrations that caused Fico's resignation.
Robert Fico understood that there was some civil discontent here with him traveling to Moscow. It actually started social campaigning for Slovakia to choose the European Union and NATO. So he actually reacted to it in his own way, put together a theory that some kind of coup was being prepared here and radicalized his own voter base or his people who are actually his supporters.
Serbians across the country are protesting against the government and President Alexander Vučić. The demonstrations began over 2 months ago in response to the government's mishandling of a tragic incident in the city of Novi Sad, where 15 people were killed when a roof collapsed at the town's newly renovated railway station.
Despite the blistering cold of winter, Serbian students are as motivated as ever to get their point across to the Serbian government and president.
The solution to this problem is very simple. As our rector said the other day, our demands need to be met. This is the simplest and the shortest solution. It is very simple.
Their main demand is official accountability from the Serbian government for the deaths of 15 people caused by the collapse of a concrete canopy at the Novi Sad train station. The protesters say the poor construction of the recently renovated station was caused by government corruption. Students aren't the only ones protesting, however. The Union of Workers of Serbia's State Electricity Company, EPS, alongside the Serbian Cultural Institutions Union, have declared a general strike in support of the student protests.
We decided to go on strike. The first demand is to fulfill the requests of the students involved in the blockades at all universities across Serbia.
Local media also reported that restaurants, private companies, non-governmental organizations and cinemas were joining the strike. Plans for large-scale demonstrations, transportation hub blockades and university faculty building occupations are also underway nationwide, a sign of just how powerful this anti-government movement is.
That government would like to somehow navigate this discussion that the protests are about, taking the power and, changing the government. But students are quite open about it. We want our institution to work. We want to see the result of the work of judiciary and prosecutor. We want people to be put on trial for what happened.
Under pressure from the constant protests, Serbia's President Alexander Vučić tried to undermine the demonstrators, claiming they were supported by, quote, foreign instructors from several Western and Eastern countries. Given Vučić's reluctance to come to an understanding with the demonstrators, protests and strikes are likely to continue for the foreseeable future, as Serbs continue to remember their fallen compatriots through their daily 15 minutes of silence, one for each of the victims of the Novi Sad tragedy.
The second swap between Israel and Hamas is set to take place later today. 4 female Israeli soldiers will be released in exchange for 200 Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli government has previously agreed to release 50 prisoners for each of the women. The hostages, aged 19 to 20, were among 7 female soldiers kidnapped from the Nahal Oz military base, where they served as lookouts observing activity inside the Gaza Strip as part of their compulsory military service. Thus far, 3 Israeli hostages have been released since the start of the ceasefire, in exchange for around 90 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom have been convicted without due process. 91 people captured during the October 7th attack remain in Hamas captivity. And that brings us to the end of this bulletin of the news, but we will be back on the hour. Until then, goodbye.